Hola, ahora sí. Muy buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos, muchísimas gracias.
Hello, good evening all. Thank you very much for coming. Let me introduce myself. My name is Diego García Cruz and I'm one of the organizers of Celsius 232, which is a terror, sci-fi and fantasy festival in all formats, video games, novels, television shows, whatever. And we've been holding this festival since 2012, and we have the great honor and pleasure of having Espacio Telefónica as one of our sponsors. They have been for a long time, and thanks to them, we're all here today. Having said that, which is the good news, I know you're going to hate me, but I have to let you know that unfortunately and regrettably, Joe will not be able to sign anything after the talk, because we have a 10 o'clock flight to Avilés, and there really is no way. So please don't ask him, because otherwise I'm going to have to play bad cop, and I don't want to. I'm really, really sorry. If you want anything signed and can go up to Avilés, great. Otherwise I'm sure he'll be back to Spain at some point, but unfortunately it can't be this time, and that's because, and that's the good news, we'll be able to talk to him for an hour and a half, an hour and 3/4, to have him tell us a bunch of things about his career and his projects. It's not every day that we get a chance to have a real master horror, both writing novels and comics and TV screenplays. And since you're not here to listen to me, I'm going to give the floor now to one of the moderators, Arturo Parroquia, who has, I'm sure, a great deal to tell you as well.
Muy buenas.
Hello. Okay, first I'd like to thank you all for joining us, given how roasting hot it is out there, but I know you were dying to meet such a fascinating character as Joe Hill, and therefore you were willing to even brave raising the blinds, which is so difficult nowadays with the heat out there. You raise the blinds and it's fire, and Juan's laughing at me already. But anyway, Joe Hill is, you know, a writer, the child and sibling of writers. You can imagine what the house must be like, with all those people staring at the walls and writing away, hoping no one's going to steal their ideas. But Joe Hill is actually one of the most fascinating guys, because he's been able to create his own career independently of his father's fame, which is obviously there, but he actually waited until he was well known enough to reveal the fact that he was his son. We'll talk to him in a minute, but he's someone who has been extremely successful, not just with his novels, but also his screenplays and comic books, of course, which have been tremendously successful, lock and key. And with me today, you've been told that he won't be able to sign you any books or copies, but Juan will be happy to sign them for you. Of course, they're not his books, it'll be a fake signature, but it doesn't matter. No, I refuse to autograph Joe's books. But anyway, let's have our guest come in straight away, and I'm sure that he'll be giving us a great deal of fascinating information. Big round of applause for Joe Hill.
Para que...
That's so you can actually hear the Spanish and English. You know, we're pretty far ahead of everything here in Spain with technology.
Yeah. Yeah?
Muy cool.
I'll wear them forever. Es una maravilla.
It is wonderful to have you here. Right, so I think it's going to be a pretty fun talk, as you can probably tell already. Joe, welcome to Spain, and welcome to this bunch of people who admire your work, and that is why they're here this evening. How are you?
Thanks so much for coming, everyone. I'm great. You guys are wonderful to come on out. Bueno, pues...
Right, and so what we want to hear, of course, is everything about your work. Of course, your latest book, Fireman, which is the one, I guess, that you particularly want people to buy right now, or you don't mind if they buy the older ones as well?
Creo que si vas a una librería y compras una copia, un ejemplar del último libro, es un error no llevarte los demás. Hay librerías súper buenas a vuestro alrededor con precio muy bajo. No hay una mejor oferta, seguro.
Well, you said once, let me see if I can quote you properly. And we can start talking about the latest book if you like, but you said once that the world is divided into two types of people. Those.
Gilipollas y mis amigos.
Well, that's true as well. Yeah, you're right. And we're not your friends, so I guess we're on the other side. No, but there's two types of people. Those who love novels about apocalyptic plagues and scaredy fucks or something of the sort.
Bueno, a ver. Sí, hay gente a la que le encanta las obras de ficción apocalíptica y los que van a morir rápido cuando haya la plaga zombie. Estoy seguro de que todos los que estamos aquí vamos a sobrevivir, ¿eh? Por lo menos el primer par de semanas después del estallido de la plaga. Nah, en serio. Creo que nos gustan las historias acerca del fin del mundo. Los seres humanos llevamos escribiendo acerca del fin del mundo, imaginándonos el fin del mundo desde el principio de los tiempos, casi, e incluso desde antes. Y creo que escribimos sobre ello y hablamos sobre ello porque sabemos que algún día va a suceder. Que para todos aquellos que estamos aquí presentes llegará el fin del mundo. Algún día moriréis. Y ese será el fin del mundo, por lo menos para vosotros. Será lo último que veáis de todos los que os rodean. Aquí ya veis, optimista ahí para empezar, de buen rollo. Pero total, que uno de los motivos por los que nos fascinan las historias apocalípticas del fin del mundo es porque sabemos que es algo que nos va a ocurrir a todos. Y si hablamos de ficción de terror, es una forma segura de lidiar con esos miedos. Creo que muchas veces, me acuerdo muchas veces, Jeff Goldblum en La Mosca. ¿Habéis visto La Mosca, la peli con Jeff Goldblum? Sí, es una de esas pelis así chulas por la tarde. Total, que en La Mosca empieza a caérsele la piel, empieza a salirle pus por todos los orificios, se le caen partes del cuerpo y lo guarda en una botella, se le cae la polla, la tiene que guardar, en fin, no sé si lo puedo decir aquí, pero le pasa en la peli, en serio. Total, que se vuelve asqueroso. Y nadie se quiere acercar a él por miedo a contagiarse. Y a la gente le encanta esa peli. Se lo pasan de maravilla viéndola. No quieres pensar en cómo se corrompe tu cuerpo. No quieres pensar en una posible enfermedad. No quieres pensar en que te fallen los órganos, los pulmones, el hígado, lo que sea. Pero pasa. Y nos pasa a la mayoría. Y no queremos pensar en ello, nos molesta, nos aterra, pero luego podemos ver una peli genial como La Mosca y profundizar en ese tema en un sitio seguro, que es la ficción. Y por eso el terror es útil.
O sea, tú has dicho que claro, que es una...
Just one thing, you said that it's nice to watch the end of the world, but don't you think that it also has a bit to say with to do with what you were saying about us knowing, all of us, that we're going to die, or almost all of us here, eventually, but at the same time you also want to be able to watch, well, human beings can't quite envision what might happen to the world once they're gone from it, once they're no longer in it, and so it's actually better to imagine that since you're going to die, you want to know how it all ends for everyone, basically.
Sí.
Of the apocalypse that's fun is we can imagine ourselves being reduced to just the basics of survival. You know, The Fireman is a story about a plague that causes spontaneous combustion. People get this stuff on them called dragon scale, and there's no cure for it. And you can't get it off you. And when you feel stress, when you feel anxiety, you begin to smoke. And if you can't control your fear, you burst into flames and you die of spontaneous combustion. And this is happening everywhere. People are burning up on every street corner. Hospitals are burning to the ground. It's a terrifying scenario. At the same time, you think, oop, the IRS just burned up. I guess I don't have to pay taxes now. Your office burned up. Don't got to clock in this morning. So there is a fun side to the end of everything. There is a little fun to be had as we slide into oblivion. I want to say I love his shirt. This is the best Donald Trump shirt I've seen yet. Clowns aren't funny.
Better than mine.
I like this one too. I've actually yearned for a David Bowie Harry Potter shirt ever since I first saw them.
The mix.
Yeah.
Has nombrado a Cronenberg.
You mentioned Cronenberg, The Fly. You have actually mentioned Cronenberg in some of your first short stories as a sort of reference, and in this book actually there is quite a lot of Cronenberg influences. Your own body or disease, or your own cells mutating and turning against you and becoming a monster. I imagine he's one of your references, Cronenberg, because I think in your head there's a sort of mix of pop culture and sort of high culture, as they call it. But I'd like to know who your models and your references are, particularly in film to start with. We can talk about comics and books later.
A ver, de niño, a los 12, 13 años más o menos, tenía amigos a los que les encantaban los deportes y que se suscribieron a Sports Illustrated. Y tenía amigos a los que les molaba el rock. No, a ver, ¿lo de Sports Illustrated era solo por los deportes o por el especial Bañadores de verano? Hombre, lo del especial, dice Joe, pues tampoco está mal, ¿eh? Para lo que iba, yo lo que hice fue suscribirme a una revista que se llama Fangoria, dedicada a los efectos especiales, cuanto más chungos y sangrientos mejor, dedicado a gente como Stan Winston, como Tom Savini. Si hubiera tenido centerfolds desplegables como los de Playboy, no verías a una conejita desnuda de estas tan guapas, sino que verías a un pavo al que se le está saliendo el ojo, que está a punto de caérsele, o que tiene un machazo en toda la cabeza. Y yo lo que hacía era pues pillar esos desplegables y colgarlos en mi habitación. De niño, mi primer ídolo fue Tom Savini. Y mientras me iba haciendo mayor, pensaba, eso es lo que quiero hacer. Quiero ser un tipo que hace efectos especiales. Quiero cargarme a peña de forma imaginativa y crear monstruos nuevos que sean aterradores. Y al final eso es lo que acabé haciendo, de una forma un poco distinta, pero bueno, uso palabras en lugar de látex, pero ¿qué le vamos a hacer?
But you didn't answer my question at all, really.
Ya, bueno, a ver, un poco sí, porque mis primeros héroes fueron Tom Savini, Rob Martin y Stan. Y también grandes directores como el recientemente desaparecido George Romero, al que adoraba. Una pequeña curiosidad: antes de ser escritor fui actor infantil. Aparecí en una sola peli, en Creepshow, de George Romero. Era un niño obsesionado con los cómics de terror y su padre trataba de tirarle la colección de cómics de terror y él encarga una muñeca de vudú, un anuncio que ve en la contraportada de uno de esos cómics, y empieza a clavarle alfileres a ese muñeco de vudú de su padre para vengarse. Bueno, pues era ese crío chungo en la peli dirigida por otra parte por Romero, con Tom Savini haciendo los efectos especiales. Y así me enamoré yo de los efectos especiales, porque estaba en la caravana de Tom Savini y le veía currando, y claro, a mí me pareció una estrella del rock. Tiene unas cejas como las de Spock en Star Trek, ¿vale? Lleva chupas de cuero con un montón de pegatinas y de parches, como uno de los Ramones, pero incluso más molón que los Ramones. Y lo más increíble es que hace un par de años vi a Savini en Sitges, en el Festival de Cine, y tiene exactamente la misma pinta que entonces. Y eso me hace pensar que Tom Savini no solo hace maquillaje de vampiros para pelis, sino que en realidad es un vampiro él.
Well, now you have answered. I'm happier. Okay, well, that's good. And you spoke about your childhood. There's an old argument going on. I'm not sure how to put it in Spanish. The nature versus nurture debate.
Educación.
Well, he's trying to figure out how to say it in Spanish. But how was it growing up in a house in which, when you finished dinner, instead of watching TV, you would sit in the living room and read books out loud and pass them round.
Fue una infancia muy victoriana, sí, tienes razón. No, os reís, os cachondeáis, pero en serio. Mis padres eran hippies, para empezar. A ver, yo me llamo Joe Hill King. Y lo de Hill viene de un tipo de una canción de los folk, de una canción folk, perdón, de los 60, un tal Joseph Hillstrom. Mi padre aún conduce en un coche que tiene una pegatina en el guardabarros que pone vota a Jimi Hendrix, que el amor os hará libres. Ya os digo, me nombraron en honor de una canción de Bob Seger. En fin, les gustaba pasearse desnudos por la casa, ¿vale? Iban en pelotas para que nos acostumbrásemos a la anatomía humana, ¿eh? Nuestros padres paseándose en pelotas por casa y mi hermana y yo así, tapándonos los ojos. No puede ser, ¿eh? Si les preguntamos ahora nos dicen que lo del día de ir desnudo no existió jamás, pero tanto mi hermana como yo lo recordamos. Así que, a ver, habrá que preguntarse a quién creemos. Total, que yo iba al cole, volví a casa y me encontraba con que mi madre es escritora y mi padre es escritor. Mi madre tenía una máquina de escribir de color rojo tomate intenso escribiendo, ¿vale? Estaba allí. Y mi padre escribía con los primeros ordenadores a los que le podía echar el guante, con la pantalla brillante, con el cursor y el procesador de textos. A los 13 años, a mí me parecía que eso es lo que se hacía, ¿sabes? Volvías del cole y te pasabas un par de horas fingiendo que te inventabas historias y que luego te pagaban, ¿vale? Eso era una profesión para mí.
Right, and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but could you tell us just roughly, some of the bedtime stories you used to get told at home? Not the books that you read, but stories that you were told, because I'm sure you were asked whether they were horror stories or not.
Jay Leno tenía un chiste buenísimo que era: Stephen King le dice a sus hijos, ¿queréis un cuento antes de iros a dormir? Y los niños dicen, ¡no! Pero que no era así en casa, en serio. Mi padre es un padre fantástico. Siempre quería que fuéramos valientes, no pretendía acojonarnos, ni mucho menos. Nos contaba muchas historias y la mayoría eran de Spider-Man, ¿vale? Se inventaba historias de Spider-Man antes de irnos a dormir, cuentos. Entendía que lo de amenazar con matar a Spider-Man no funcionaba, porque éramos lo suficientemente listos como para darnos cuenta de que a Spider-Man no lo van a matar. Y que si él lo mataba en uno de esos cuentos, pues no molaba. Y tampoco contaba porque seguía vivo en los cómics. Así que lo que hacía era humillar a Spider-Man. En una historia, por ejemplo, Spider-Man come algo que está en mal estado, un perrito caliente pasado, y de repente ataca el lagarto, y ahí está Spider-Man flash lanzando telarañas, y el lagarto le hunde el puño en las tripas a Peter Parker se dobla y de repente se va por la pata. Y resulta que se ha cagado en el Spider traje.
And my sister and I are screaming, no, stop. And as it happened, I'm a comic book lover. Most of what I learned about stories, I learned from reading comic books as a kid. I learned from reading Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore and Chris Claremont. Years and years later, my first big professional breakthrough was when I wrote an 11-page Spider-Man story. And I'm still immensely proud of the fact that I got to write Spider-Man for Marvel, even if only briefly. But my Spider-Man story isn't very good. It's kind of I choked. I so wanted it to be great. It was such a fulfillment of my dreams. And I just wrote the most mediocre Spider-Man story ever. So that's sort of, professionally, it was an early high point. Creatively, it was an early low point. If I ever get a chance to write Spider-Man again, he will crap the Spidey suit. That will happen, or they can fire me.
Bueno, con esto hilamos muy bien con el universo.
Seguro.
Well, that connects us right with your comic book universe. Perfect. see into that. So why all of a sudden someone who has been thinking of being a writer decides to do something so unorthodox or so unusual as to begin by writing storylines for comic books? Do you think that it was a very bold move? And by the way, what he means is that in Spain perhaps it's not very orthodox. I mean, elsewhere perhaps not so.
A ver, escribí una serie bastante larga, Lock and Key, y a veces me llegaban preguntas de mis allegados diciéndome, pero ¿de verdad que merece la pena? ¿Tiene sentido lo que estás haciendo?
More respectability in writing novels than in writing comics. There were a couple problems. There were a couple reasons I wound up writing Lock and Key for 7 years. The first is that I have a comic book imagination, that I don't think comic books are a lesser form of literature. I think that a great comic book can be every bit as powerful as a great novel or a great film or a great album. I think that comic books are a uniquely American form of art. There is something fundamentally American about comic books in the way baseball is fundamentally American or the blues is fundamentally American, and I wanted to plant myself creatively in that big stream, that big river of American culture. I would argue, in fact, that comic books are more mainstream in America than what is called mainstream literature. Certainly, many more people know Spider-Man than they do Robert Angstrom from the Rabbit Run novels by John Updike. So I always had a comic book imagination. The work of Neil Gaiman and Alan Moore deeply impressed me. When I wrote my first novel, when my first novel was published, it begins with a quote from Alan Moore, which sort of was planting my flag about what I care about. The other thing, though, is that I was a comic book writer before I was a novelist. I wrote 4 novels I couldn't sell, that no one wanted. I spent 3 years writing a novel that was turned down by every publisher in New York, every publisher in London, and for an extra kick in the pants, it was turned down by every publisher in Canada. Talk about a low blow, you know. I was unable to sell a novel for 10 years, but I was able to break into comic books. That was and I began to think, you know, maybe I don't have a novel in me. I took a shot. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe that's not where my talents lie. But I knew I could write a good short story. I had written several short stories that I felt were very good and that had won some recognition. And they had won me enough recognition, so they got me a tryout at Marvel Comics. And I thought, maybe I can't be a novelist, but I might be able to write Ghost Rider. And if that happens, that could be a pretty good life. That could make me pretty happy. So there was that. The other thing is I sold Lock and Key before I sold my first novel, Heart-Shaped Box. So Lock and Key existed as a series. It didn't come out until after Heart-Shaped Box, but we were developing it a good 6 or 9 months before Heart-Shaped Box was released, before anyone really knew about, before it was really public knowledge about my parentage, my family. So it was something I committed to. I was creatively committed to the project before I had really had any kind of success.
Has dicho una cosa que...
You said something that I found really interesting, and that is that you don't think that comics are a lower form of art. And you're probably the first modern artist who has managed to succeed in what to me, are my 3 favorite art forms, which are comic books, film, and novels. And probably the only other similar example is maybe Neil Gaiman, which is one of the artists that you admire the most, as you said. So do you think that in today's world, comics, books, film, novels, actually television series, and I know that you have that Lock and Key project going on, are sort of blending into one, and it's almost impossible to tell which is the highest art form?
I learned how to be a writer professionally from Neil Gaiman's example in many ways. You know, when a movie comes out, the original is always better than the sequel. I'm like the Neil Gaiman sequel, which is kind of like Iron Man 2. Not quite Iron Man 1, but, you know, but everyone has to live with me anyway. No. But I did learn about this. I did get this idea from reading Neil, that there was great strength if you could learn to write across many forms. So if you could learn to write comics, if you could learn to tell your stories on television, in films, in prose, as you know, young adult fiction, children's picture books, working across forms made you strong. If you could manage to do it, if you could find a way to respect each form and to employ their particular strengths. One of the reasons many novelists try to write comics and fail is because they seem to believe that a comic book is a novel with pictures. And it's not. In Lock and Key, the sequences, the pages that always make me happiest are the ones that don't have any words on them. Paragraphs, pages, chapters in comics are entirely visual, and you have to be willing to suppress your ego to let the artist take center stage and employ their talents to the fullest. You're really writing to the artist. The artist is your audience, and then the audience for the artist is the reader. So when Lock and Key when Lock and Key is at its very best, I think you see these sequences, these pages, where there are no words on them at all, and that's when I feel I've done my job best.
Has hablado de Lock and Key, que es una...
And you spoke about Lock and Key, which has a really complex structure. I think it is probably one of the most complex structures you've developed. Product of a sick mind, definitely. Product of a mind that was told Spider-Man bedtime stories. But let's not get into that. But before that, you tried out with The Cape, which is another comic book of yours, which is very well known, very well known, but I haven't actually read it. And since of course here, yeah, I know, but since obviously what we want here, yeah, you've read it, Juan, I know, but that's not the point I'm trying to make right now. Juan, can you just shut up for a minute, Juan, and go off to Celsius or something? Okay, so Joe, so now I think we're more comfortable. Now he's gone. But since I haven't read The Cape, and it's made it look as if I didn't quite like the world of comics as much, I have a surprise for you. I'm going to resort to the audience, because there's somebody here in the audience who's one of the great Spanish comic book writers, one of our greatest artists, Carlos Pacheco, who's here. And so please, Carlos, come here and ask him a couple of questions about The Cape. And Carlos didn't know this was going to happen, and he's completely unprepared, and that's why he looks like that. And also has no microphone, unfortunately, so I can't hear a word. Okay, Carlos, I wanted to be the first to actually ask to beat up Arturo because of what he said about him despising comic book writers. Okay, well, you can beat me up after. Since Joe can't sign any books, you can beat me up in the meantime. And I've been caught completely unawares. I had no idea I was going to get to do this, but since Arturo has now read The Cape, I'm going to ask you a question. It is one of my favorite works of yours. I work for Marvel, and I work with superheroes all the time, and The Cape I find absolutely amazing superhero story, and I'll tell you why. The fact that you use an element, an ornamental element in this superhero, and turn it into the key crux of the story, I thought was amazing. In fact, I remembered that story of Captain America when he becomes that nomad in that Stephen Upton, where he treads on his cape and he loses it because it's in his way. But in your story, it's the key element. It's absolutely the key to that whole story. And so the only thing I can actually ask you now is if you're going to write any more stories, The Cape, or you've decided to just let it drop. I thought the first series was wonderful. The second, with the origins in Vietnam and all that, graphically it was different, but I would love it if you were to publish more. I really love to see more.
What you do what Zach Howard does, what Gabriel Rodriguez does, the artists I've worked with. To me, that's what real talent looks like, you know. And when I grew up, and I read comics, I didn't pay any attention to who wrote them. All I cared about was who drew them. You know, it was John Buscema, who I loved, Barry Windsor Smith, who I thought was tremendous. And, you know, a lot of people misunderstand what illustrators do, what comic book illustrators, they think that they're creating beautiful images, which they are. But first and foremost, they're storytellers. They're figuring out ways to present information in a logical sequence so that you can feel something emotionally. And I often think that in this day and age, comic book artists do not get their due as directors and as the directors and cameramen of this unique form of storytelling. So anyway, it's a tremendous honor to meet you, and I'm just in awe of your work. There is actually going to be a new Zach Howard, and so The Cape began as a short story that I wrote for my collection 20th Century Ghosts. It was then adapted into a comic book. I worked with a comic book writer named Jason Chiaramella and the artist Zach Howard, and I'm very proud of the result. A lot of people have dug it. And then there was an origin story called The Cape 1969, and now there is another Cape story that's in development, a 4-issue Cape story that tells about the lost weekend, a missing period of time in the life of the villainous main character. But I did want to say one thing. So I worked on comic books is the art of collaboration. You have to have fun working with others and letting them do their thing and exploring their abilities. And so I worked with another writer, Jason Chiaramella, and with Zach Howard on The Cape. And it's about a man who uses his childhood cape to fly, and instead of doing heroic things, he does terrible things. Among them, he murders his girlfriend very early in the story. And so the police come looking at him, and they think he's the guy, but they can't explain how she fell from 10,000 feet when there was nothing to fall from. They don't know how she got in the air and how she got mashed. But they're looking at him. They're pretty sure he's the guy who did it. And he knows they're getting closer to him. So they leave, the two cops leave, and they drive away in their car. And me and Jason were talking about how our hero, our anti-hero, Eric, would kill them, what he would do to knock them off. And Jason said, what if there was a zoo nearby and he picked up a bear and dropped it on them? And he meant it as a joke, but I thought it was so hilarious. I said, that's how he's got to do it. So in the comic, the cops are on the phone and they're talking about their suspect, and Eric flies over them with a baby grizzly bear and drops it into their car. And then he lands a block away and he has a conversation with his brother, and in the background you can see the car shaking back and forth and screams and blood coming out of it. And finally one of the cops staggers out and he's been clawed up, and he pulls out a gun to shoot Eric, and then the bear hits him from behind and takes him off his feet. And I felt so satisfied looking at that sequence. And I thought, no one who's read everyone, you know, people who read comics have never read this. They've never seen anyone killed by falling bear. And to this day, if people ask me for advice for young storytellers, my advice is to drop the bear. Try to find a way in every story to drop the bear. You know, do one thing that feels perfect, that the reader has never seen before, that will stun and outrage. If you do that, you've got them. They're coming back for the next issue.
Bueno, yo voy a aprovechar que tenemos aquí a Carlos.
Well, and since we have Carlos here, I want to thank him for joining us. And actually, I think this is a great combination. He was saying that the comic book is all about partnership, cooperation between the writer and the artist, and this is a great opportunity for a future cooperation. And you know, this could be the beginning of a great friendship and partnership at some point in the future. Thank you very much for joining us. It's so wonderful to have you join us. And of course, it's not all good because Juan is now back. Yeah, what a shame. I'm back. Okay, there's something I really like in the way
A ver, el pavo que estaba...
Madre mía, hasta
Bueno,
yo...
ya he entendido.
Oh, now Joe's starting to pick on me as well. I think he's gotten the point of this, Joe. This is starting to be fun. Okay, let's talk about your participation in the Almighties. But in any case, I really, really like how you work in both your comic book stories and your novels with those cliffhangers, how you relate to the cliffhanger, which is always being considered by the stiff upper lip writer types, those very artsy writers who see it as sort of cheap, as a cheap, easy trick when it's not at all. And I speak from experience, so tell us about why you use cliffhangers so much and why you do it so well.
Easy trick. Any cheap, easy trick to keep the reader engaged, I'm desperate. I'll do whatever it takes to keep people involved. I do think that we live in a world where there are 450 new TV shows every year. That's not an exaggeration. That's the actual number. There are 450 new TV shows of original content every single year. There are something like 1,000 releases to cinema every single year. There's 1,000 videos uploaded to YouTube, something like every hour, including the program these guys do, which shows that YouTube will take anything, but in a world filled with distraction, you have to find some way to keep the reader interested. And so that's why one of the reasons why I write horror is because horror is the form of fiction where suspense is cranked, as the volume of suspense is cranked as high as it will go, as high as people can stand. You want to push them right to the edge in terms of what they can bear. And one of the reasons you do that is artistic, because it's interesting to see how character is revealed when characters are put under intense pressure. But the other reason you do it is because you hope that they will keep turning the pages. So you never want to end a chapter in a situation where the reader feels, well, that's nice. We've come to a nice stopping point. I'll see what's on YouTube. But even mainstream literary writers depend on suspense. Suspense is just a word we use to describe what you feel that keeps you turning the pages. And if you don't have any sense of suspense, you don't keep turning the pages and no one will finish your book. So every writer deals in suspense, whether they admit it or not.
Yo ya he menospreciado el cómic.
I have criticized comic books. Let me now criticize short stories, because you started with short stories and there was a point when you decided to move on to novels. Is it a way of saying I am already a grown-up writer? So short stories is what you do as training? Is it sort of the training phase for a novel, or does the short story have its own time and place independently of the status of the writer?
Written short story is almost unmatched in terms of its literary power. That a really good short story is the literary art at its most refined and most powerful. I also think that sort of on the flip side of that, I had to face, at a certain point, that I did not know how to write a novel. I wrote 4 novels that were not good enough to publish. And at some point in that process, I thought, boy, I can't, if it takes me 2 years to finish every story and I'm not selling these stories, I'm never going to get published. And I have to get smaller. I have to write stories that only take me a month or a couple weeks. So that's when I began to focus on writing short fiction, and I wrote a lot of really bad short stories. But gradually I began to find my way to a set of skills that worked in composing a story that could be read in a single sitting. And I still think that a really good chapter in a novel can be 1,000 pages long, but often even a really great long novel is a succession of really well-composed little vignettes or short stories. I revere David Mitchell. I think David Mitchell is the finest novelist working in the English language of his generation. If you look at his books, every book he's written, with only one or two exceptions, are actually collections of novellas. That's one of the reasons they feel so tightly constructed. He doesn't feel there's any need to artificially bloat a story past its necessary length. I actually think this is a funny thing for a guy who's written several long books to say, but I actually think a lot of books are too long, that they run on much longer than is necessary, and that the perfect length for many stories is about 100 pages. My next book is actually a collection of 4 short novels, and each novel is about 120 pages long. And I just feel like at that length, the story is lean and mean. There's no fat on it. It does its job, and it's over. And I think for a reader, that can be very satisfying.
Hay gente ahora mismo.
There are people right now who are asking us through Twitter what piece of advice you would give someone who wants to be a writer. Well, that's a good one.
No, en serio, mi primer consejo en Twitter es deja Twitter. O sea, si tú estás preguntando en Twitter cómo tienes que hacer para ser escritor, deja Twitter y ponte a escribir.
But you haven't had it particularly easy to become a writer, and I say this.
No, tuve muchas ventajas, en serio. A los 18 decidí firmar como Joe Hill y olvidarme del apellido. Y lo hice porque no quería que me publicaran porque mi padre es famoso. No quería escribir una novela mala y que un editor me dijera, bueno, es el hijo de quien es, va a vender un montón de ejemplares de todas formas, así que venga, vamos a publicarlo. Porque los lectores se dan cuenta y empezarían, a este tío lo han publicado porque su padre es famoso, no voy a volver a leerlo. Yo quería tener una carrera larga desde el principio y era inseguro. Tenía que sentirme como que lo estaba haciendo bien, que las historias eran buenas, por méritos propios. Y por eso empecé a firmar como Joe Hill. Y me pasé muchísimos años firmando solo como Joe Hill y aprendiendo la profesión. Y cuando tuve cierto éxito, cuando vendí el cómic de Spider-Man, cuando vendí la colección de relatos, nadie sabía de quién era hijo yo, le gustaban los relatos y eso estuvo muy bien. Pero no nos pasemos, ¿eh? Mi familia tenía mucha pasta, tenía mucho apoyo material, soy blanco y varón. No tuve que enfrentarme a muchos de los prejuicios a los que se enfrentan otros colegas u otras colegas. Podía firmar con mi propio nombre, no tenía problema, y de hecho escribí varios guiones.
I needed to have a check coming in, so I felt like I wasn't just, gliding on the family fortune. So I wrote screenplays and used that to fill the fridge, and so in many ways, I've had a lot of advantages writers don't have.
Sí, pero no me has dejado terminar la pregunta.
Right, but you didn't let me finish. This has been a really difficult interview.
Perdona.
It's such a difficult interview because, of course, as you would have noticed, it's really hard to get a word out of him. Very reserved guy, very introverted, doesn't say a word. Now, actually, my question was going to be, Juan said, oh, it looks like nice weather out, and then he just goes. Now, my question actually was going to be that once you said that as a child, you were very anxious, and you proved that because you didn't let me finish the question. But I think that every writer has to find within himself the fuel, something that will enable you to draw the energy you need to create something. In your case, perhaps anxiety is that driving force.
Yeah, I think that that's true. I think that, that I am a bit of an anxious person. I'm good at thinking of worst case scenarios. That is very useful in my career. That's not always very useful as a human being. After my first novel came out, it was a big hit, bigger than I ever imagined having any of my books. I was more of a success than I ever imagined being. I responded to that success in the usual way, by having a nervous breakdown and getting divorced. And I went through a long paranoid phase. I had fantasies of surveillance and persecution, people watching me. I seemed normal. I would do an event like this, and I could be funny and articulate and sell the books. But when I got back to the hotel room, I'd tear it apart looking for hidden cameras. And I did that for about a year. A lot of talking to myself. And a lot of fantasies, a lot of, troubling fantasies of persecution that even now I'm uncomfortable talking about. At the time I was a single dad, and I had 3 boys, and at a certain point I felt it was more important to be a functioning human being than a functioning novelist. So I got into therapy, and I got on a anti-anxiety drug called Paxil. I was aware when I did that there was a chance it would mean that I might not be able to write again. And in fact, I had resisted going into therapy for years because I was afraid if I got help about my anxiety, it would reduce my creative abilities. What I found out after I got help was that being a paranoid, depressive was damaging my creative abilities, and that actually being a happy, functioning, healthy human being made me more creative, not less. So the myth of the artist who is, a lunatic, unstable, reckless, difficult to be around, is false. It does not make you, being that way does not make you a great artist. It only makes you a miserable human being.
Ese miedo a...
Well, that fear of what's inside our head is part of almost all your stories. In almost all your stories, the mind is one of the main enemies. The other is the body, and the other, interestingly, are the places of friendship. So friends, or whom we consider to be our closest friends, turn out to be always one of the biggest threats. In Lock and Key, for instance, you talk about that key that opens minds and panic, and well, everyone who's read Lock and Key will remember those images of the panic that you feel when you find something that opens your mind and shows you those demons that lie within. And that is, I think, one of your raw materials. That is one of the things that you force yourself to do. You turn that key in your mind to get those stories out.
I mean, I think that what's inside our heads is dangerous. It can be very dangerous. I think we've known for a long time that the greatest threat facing us is not a killer supernatural clown. It's not a vampire. It's not a devil. It's other people. That's what really scares us, is the potential in other people to do us harm and to harm our loved ones. And often that's upsetting, the thought that your friend, your neighbor, could be someone terrible secretly. That's a haunting and troubling idea. We turn to fiction as a place to explore that idea safely, to think about, well, what would I do if someone I love betrayed me? What would I do if I found out something about a friend that was irredeemable, that changed the way I felt about them fundamentally? What happens if those terrible things in that person's head get free? And this is an idea I've come back to again and again in Lock and Key, but also in Horns, which is a story about a man who inherits the powers of the devil, and instantly everyone begins confessing their deepest, darkest secrets. And that's a book about where the question is, if you knew the worst about the people you loved, could you still love them? I think the answer is yes, but it took me the book to figure that out.
Y hacía referencia también a Holmes, en el que uno de los grandes superpoderes.
Well, one of the biggest superpowers in those horns of that character is precisely that it is able to draw out of the people he's talking to their deepest desires, their darkest secrets, and those are, I think, the most terrifying moments in that book, where you see that anyone, a waitress or a chef or a doctor, suddenly can bring out these hidden secret desires within them which you could have never imagined. It's the fear of others, of other people, that propels a lot of your stories.
It's horrifying, but it's also kind of funny. You know, the thing that comes pouring out of people. And I've thought for a long time that humor and horror are fundamentally the same thing, two sides of the same coin. If you watch The Three Stooges, you know, and you see Larry bashing Curly over the head with a hammer, you laugh. If you see Leatherface taking a mallet to someone and smashing their face in, you flinch and scream in horror. But fundamentally, it's the same scene. You're having, you know, it's going right past your forebrain and into your reptile brain and evoking this animal reaction, which might be laughter or might be horror, but in either way, it's because you're seeing something that's deeply wrong, the violation of the human body by another human.
Pero no solo eso, sino también...
Right, but also closeness to other people. The fact that others might know your deepest, darkest secrets. It's also in the Cape, it's in Horns, somehow also in Nosferatu, because Charlie Manx is also somebody who knows a lot about the people who are around him. And so it's also secrets that are a big component or what drives other people. It is one of the basic components of your structure of your stories, of your horror stories.
Being really known by another human being is frightening. You know, it's very terrifying for people to see who you aren't when you're not in public. You know, to see who you are when you're not in public, to see you at your worst. To know about the things that you're ashamed of doing, your regrets, your mistakes, you know, status. As animals, status is very important to us. And to be intimate with another human being is to risk the loss of status in their eyes. And that's very, very frightening. It's one of the reasons social media is so scary. You know, social media is, I think at this point, a lot scarier than anything I've ever written. You know, because there's this fear that you'll say something or think something and people will pounce on it and they'll all join in on hating you. You know, a whole crowd of people will be, you know, look at this horrible person, and you'll be shamed, not in front of a few people, a dozen people, but hundreds of people or thousands of people. Public humiliation in some ways is more terrifying than death. We're back to Spider-Man crapping his pants.
Ahora que mencionas las redes sociales, como escritor...
And talking about social media as a horror story writer who scares us in each of your novels, do you think it's actually possible to produce something beyond the reality of having an American president publishing things like Opfefe on his Twitter?
Yeah.
No. No. I do think that in some ways Trump is a symptom of great unhappiness about the way the future is rushing at us all. That he's, you know, as is often the case with conservative politicians, there is the belief they make a promise that they can stop the future from coming, that they can put things back to the way they were 20 or 30 or 40 years ago when things were better for this group or that group. Well, the group they're talking about is white guys, mostly. But in Trump's case, and there are some real reasons the future is scary. I mean, how many of us know what we're going to be doing in 20 years? You know, who's going to be driving? If you're a truck driver, what are you going to be doing in 10 years when all the trucks are driving themselves? I've been working with a translator, Diego, while I've been here, who is one of the organizers of the Celsius 232 Festival, is a wonderful guy. And every time he sees me using Google Translate on a menu, he jokes, do you want to put me out of a job? But it's kind of not a joke, is it? You know, what happens if we don't need translators anymore? You know, what happens to us when our machines have made it unnecessary for any of us to do work? That's frightening. And the problem is when people are scared, they're easy to take advantage of. It's easy to manipulate and use people when they're scared and angry. And Trump has effectively played to that. He's a deeply ignorant man. He's deeply unqualified for his office. He seems to have no notions of dignity or decency. There's no signs that he sees the presidency as anything except a way to enrich his family. But he promises his supporters that he can bring back the past, that somehow he can stop globalization and technology from changing their world. It's a lie, but for him it's a very useful lie, and if he can ride it and avoid being impeached and going to jail, he can probably make himself a few bucks.
Yeah.
He's certainly selling a lot of Make America Great hats. That's been great for Trump Industries.
Bueno, lo que pasa es que no tenemos tiempo.
Unfortunately, we don't have time to tell him about our politicians here. But Joe, you spoke about the similarities between humor and horror, and I really think that's also what makes the difference in your stories, because in your stories it seems as if you're constantly, as soon as you get to a sort of limit of horror, you always kind of try and introduce an element of humor. Maybe you don't want to horrify people too much, or you don't want to scare people too much, but it's as if you don't really want to scare them too much, and so you introduce the note of humor. But maybe that's my impression only.
You're right, and I think that's because horror is a deeply misunderstood genre. Horror is about the art of empathy. It's about making you care about other people and love other people, and one way to do that is with humor. If someone makes you laugh, they please you. If they please you, you begin to care about them. Then if you care about them and you see them facing the worst, if you see them backed into a terrifying corner, you're emotionally invested in whether they survive or not. So if horror doesn't come packaged with a sense of empathy, if it doesn't introduce characters for you to love and care about and identify with and root for, then it fails. This is why so many of the slasher films of the 1980s are such bad horror films. They're bad horror films, but they're great slapstick comedies. You know, when you watch Nightmare on Elm Street, when you watch Halloween, when you watch Friday the 13th, you don't really care about any of those people. You don't really care. I mean, it's, you know, Freddy Krueger is knocking off the cheerleader, the jock, the virgin. You don't really care about those people.
En realidad quieres que los maten.
Say again?
You actually want them killed. You want them to be killed.
All the fun in the movie comes from watching the way Freddy Krueger wipes them out in some inventive, hilarious, gross way. In that way, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th are much closer to the Three Stooges than they are to the kind of horror like Let the Right One In or Jaws, where we deeply care about the characters, and when bad things happen to them, we feel fear. You know, I don't want to sound stuck on a groove about social media, but one of the reasons I've mostly stopped using it, I do sometimes to help promote events or the sale of the book, the books, the release of the books, but one of the reasons I've stopped using it is because social media has been carefully engineered to make you hate your fellow man. It puts you in your tribe, your bubble, with people who believe what you believe. And then when you put down people in other tribes, people who believe different things than you, you score points. People like, yes, that's right, those people are despicable, and I like when you make fun of them. Yes, yes, yes. Everything about social media is created to engineer a feeling of contempt in you and to keep you angry, to make you angry at the people who don't see the world like you do. Great art, great horror, but also fantasy, science fiction, mainstream literature, great films, great music make you love your fellow man. It makes you love human beings and feel empathy and care about what happens to them, even if they don't believe what you believe. Kurt Vonnegut said that the role of the artist is to make you love human beings a little bit more. And I believe that, and I had a moment on Twitter one night when I thought, if I stay on any longer, I won't be able to still love people. I'm going to become a misanthrope if I stay on, and I don't want to be that person. So I had to get off.
El Twitter me están entrando ahora mismo, de verdad.
I totally see that. But there is, well, one of your stories, I've read absolutely everything you've written, including...
Buen tipo, bien.
I said about you.
Tiene posis tuyos de los de la nevera, los tiene él, se los ha leído también.
Even some post-its he wrote, he's got. But the issue is that you wrote a story for Squire magazine, which was called In the Tall Grass. I think of everything you've written, I love everything you've written, but I think that is an absolute masterpiece. That is absolutely horrifying story.
Absolutamente estremecedor.
It's absolutely horrifying, and that's what I was going to ask you, because it's a story that you wrote with Stephen King. And when I read your novels on your own, you're a wonderful, wonderful writer, but you're more optimistic. But in that particular story, and I think you took everything maybe to the darkest limit. Yeah, it ends very badly.
No.
What's wrong with you?
No, me gusta. No.
Well, no, it's not that. It's not that. I actually like it. I like your optimistic side better, because in that, I mean, you did manage. Okay, his father is older and perhaps more burnt out, and you know, it happens to all of us as we get older. We're no longer as fresh. But no, you created absolutely wonderful characters. You built amazing empathy for those people who get lost in the tall grass, and all of a sudden you kill them all off.
Mierda que os leáis el artículo.
Yeah, forget about reading that. So, are you more pessimistic when you write with other people?
No, I don't think so. I think that my dad and I wrote that story together, trading. I would write a few pages, he would write a few pages. And I think gradually he realized I had baited him into a gross out contest. And he was determined to win, which tells you who wrote what in the story. So actually, did he write the gross part? I don't know. I guess I don't remember anymore. But, you know, in the case, I've written 2 stories with my dad, Throttle and In the Tall Grass. And in both those stories, it was a case where he was between projects, I was between projects. We found ourselves together in the same general area where we had a free week, and we said, let's write something, and so we wrote something. My dad's next novel is called Sleeping Beauties, which he wrote with my brother, Owen King, who's an incredibly gifted writer. And I think it's going to be pretty awesome. I think people are going to love it. I'm pretty psyched.
De todas formas, sí que...
But in any case, it is true that you are more optimistic. In fact, in Fireman, which is a novel in which, well, don't spoil it, Juan, no spoilers. Well, it's about, it's a rather optimistic take on the apocalypse. It's sort of the sunny side of the apocalypse. So we're dying, but everything's so beautiful. So cute, apocalypse?
It was kind of, so the heroine of the fireman, the lead character is not the fireman. The lead character is Harper, who is infected with dragon scale, but she's also pregnant, and she's a nurse, and she knows if she can stay alive to bring her baby to term, the baby will probably be born healthy, that it will not have dragon scale, will not have the illness. And I thought Harper loves Julie Andrews, and she loves Mary Poppins. And she has fantasies about singing along and then like a bird landing on her finger and singing to her. She's very optimistic, and I just thought that was an interesting contrast to, you know, you watch something like Walking Dead and everyone is sweaty and they're wetting themselves and, you know, it's just, they're so, and I thought, you know, not everyone is like that. But even in terrible moments, there was a great writer of crime fiction who was on the Titanic, and he insisted his wife get off. And as the boat went down, she looked back, and he was leaning on the rail, smoking a cigarette with one of the great millionaires of the day, and I'm blanking on his name, but there was a great millionaire who was on the boat who also went down. Maybe it was one of the Astors. I'm not sure. But he was just sitting there having a mild conversation and smoking a cigarette in the last moments. No panic. He wasn't, you know, rending his clothes and his hair. He wasn't on his knees sobbing. He didn't dampen the front of his pants. I like to think that they were talking about crime fiction. you know, about books that they had read, or maybe what a crisp night it was. Maybe they were enjoying the music because the music played right to the end. It is very natural when faced with the worst to break down, but I also think some people reach deep, and when faced with the worst, they bring out their best, and that's the kind of person I wanted to write about in The Fireman. So that's how I came to Harper. And so it is in some ways a very optimistic book for a book about everyone dying. But I would say I think that my father is a very optimistic writer. That most of those books are not about the triumph of evil. I do, though. I think most of those books are about the triumph of courage. There are sometimes contests between good and evil. Evil can almost always be pushed back, although it may cost a sacrifice.
Yo lo que estoy descubriendo es que Joe Hill es un antisistema.
What I'm discovering is that you're a rebel, clearly a dangerous person. Here you are, and we're calm, it's fine, but clearly you're a dangerous rebel because you're speaking about leaving social media. You're speaking about something which is very unpopular right now, which is being an optimist and believing in courage and a sense of humor instead of complaining and bitching, which is what everyone's doing on Twitter. Yeah.
Eso lo ha dicho él, ¿eh? Lo ha dicho él, ¿no?
And he's spoken about Naked Day, which I think is a really great idea, actually. And I look wonderfully nude, so I'm definitely in favor of that. But the most amazing thing, Joe, is that you're actually somebody who believes in things and speaks out for things that are not at all fashionable or trendy today.
Qué amable por tu parte.
No, really, I mean it, and with a certain amount of terror too. But maybe you're more afraid of the present than of the future.
I mean, if I was more courageous, I'd actually delete my Twitter profile instead of still using it to sell books. I think that this is, we were in a great moment just a couple years ago, and I'm hopeful we'll get back to that. We were in a great moment politically. We were in a great moment culturally, creatively. But people often ask me what scares me the most, and, my answer is so unimaginative. I'm scared of something bad happening to my kids. And you try to protect them from everything, but one thing you can't protect them from is history itself. You never know when you're going to look around and realize you're the one standing on the deck of the Titanic with your kids with you. And I do sometimes worry we're having a little bit of a global Titanic moment, but the ship hasn't gone down yet, and I'm going to keep listening to the music until it does.
Y con esto ya
And to finish, because we have to open the floor for questions and then you have to take a flight somewhere, but when I read stories or books about Germany in the 30s, and I then read the memoirs of Jews who lived through those times, I always think, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you see this coming? Why didn't you realize what was going to happen? And probably they believed that it was just a passing phase, or that things would get better, or that, they did prefer to be optimistic and think that things were not going to be as terrible as they did turn out to be. And you're right that perhaps we are in a Titanic moment right now and we don't realize, but we have nowhere to go because, they're on this one planet.
Yeah, well, on that cheerful note, thank you so much for coming tonight. Enjoy the last pitiful scrap of your lives.
¿Qué pregunta tan fresquita para acabar?
What a wonderfully cheerful question to wrap it up. Juan, brilliant. But he's an optimist. He has put a pregnant woman as the heroine in a novel, and she believes there's this new life that's going to emerge.
That there will be a future for the baby. And we'll get past this. I believe that we will get past this. A lot of people are scared of Trump. Well, he's a vile little crook. He's a stupid and immoral man. But he's so stupid that he's having trouble doing as much damage as a much smarter man might be able to do. You know, you were talking about Hitler. Trump's not Hitler. You know, first of all, Hitler was this tremendous monster who dreamt of genocide. So on that level, he was 10,000 times worse than, you know, Trump could ever be. On the other hand, Trump lacks the intellectual facilities to run a government, which Hitler did. You know, Hitler ran his government right into the ground and destroyed his nation. But he held the reins of power for years and years, and Trump seems absolutely bewildered by his inability to even pass a simple bill. I don't honestly think he knows how government works. I think, you know, he said he loved all the amendments to the Constitution, you know, the first, the second, the 33rd. There's not like 33 amendments to the Constitution, or however he got the number wrong. There's like, you know, and it hits you. He's never read it. He doesn't even know what it says, you know. You know, hopefully he'll bungle for a couple years, and we've already started to see decency pushing back. There was a great election in France where they elected a guy who seemed sane and stable, flawed. We're all flawed. You know, even Justin Trudeau probably has flaws somewhere. I'm not sure where. You know, there must be something. Maybe he has an annoying laugh. You know, but even Justin Trudeau is not perfect. But there are some signs that people are, you know, are reminding themselves that everyone's human, and we all have to make it work on this planet somehow. You can't just build a wall and hide from the world.
Bueno, vamos a callarnos ya nosotros para que también.
Right, let's give people a chance to ask you questions too, since they're here. So there's some microphones, so please raise a hand. And as soon as you get the microphone, go ahead and ask your question.
I want to say one thing about my dad, you know, and normally, and I've spent years, normally, you know, when I go out in public, I try not to make a big deal about my dad. But my dad has had a whole series of literary achievements over the course of his life. You know, he won a medal for the, you know, a National Book Award medal, and he's had all these bestsellers and great reviews and won prizes and stuff. But his ultimate literary achievement was he got blocked by Trump on Twitter.
Bravo.
You know, that's it. That's the peak. He'll never do anything greater than that. And he knows it. He's totally stoked.
Nosotros,
Mi padre fue a las...
Your dad was actually one of the first people that we had on our program as a key.
Ya te lo mandaré, que está todo en castellano y te va.
We can send it to you. It's all in Spanish, so you won't understand a word, but...
Nosotros dijimos además, concretamente,
in our second show, we said specifically that he was the biggest writer of the second half of the 20th century, and we truly believe that. So we hope to one day have a show about you as well. But do give people a chance to ask questions. They're waiting. Go ahead. Okay, I'm going to ask the question in Spanish or in English. I don't mind.
Your father in general, and I am here today because I was curious about your father's generation.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm certified. So, esta es la razón por la que le quiero hacer la pregunta. Usted ha insistido 3 veces.
This is one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you a question. You were talking about this book of the apocalypse and how the music plays on, you know, like on the Titanic. And what I wanted to ask you is, what do you think about this new product, which is this new multimedia product, where the script is written on songs? I don't want to say the title of the film, because I didn't find the film that good, but the whole concept of writing a script based on songs, and to have all the sequences and the whole pace of the story built around these songs and someone's story. I'm not sure whether I've made myself clear. It was completely unclear, in fact, but I didn't get it. I hope you did, Joe. Well, what I'm saying is, you know, the director decides that he wants to write his own life story into a film, but the film is going to be built on a script which is based on the lyrics of songs. And So the film is all structured. I'm not going to say the name of the film because the film which is actually now in this. Did you like La La Land? Is I think what she's asking. It's not. It's Driving Baby. It's Driving Baby is what she's talking about. Or Baby Driver. Okay. But it's actually a failure, I think. But what I like is the concept. What do you think of the concept? About the concept of Baby Driver.
Book writer, and I think it's very natural for one art form to blend into another. So you have art, and you have words, you have lettering, and you have coloring, and when everything comes together, it's great. You know, a rock band is the same way. You know, you have, you know, Keith on guitar, Mick on vocals, and, you know, you got bass, you got drums, and you create some music that people can dance to. So same with a film, you know, the interaction of a great script with beautiful images and a wise use of music could be terrific. I would love if The Fireman would be done as a musical.
Oh, sería una preciosidad.
Oye,
That'd be wonderful. A question, really quick question, just short, one sentence answer. I know this will be hard for you. It's the end of the world, it's the apocalypse, and for the human race to survive, you have to destroy one of these two things: rock music or horror novels. Which would you destroy? End of the world.
I know you said just one sentence, but can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do we get to keep everything that already exists?
Sí.
So we get to keep, so if there could be no more horror novels, but we get to keep all the horror novels that have already been published. We don't get to have any new rock music, but we can keep all the rock music that already existed?
No, hay que borrarlo todo.
No, you'd have to wipe everything out.
Wipe everything out. Oh, I guess I'll wipe out horror fiction. Keep rock. Well, I don't want to live in a world. I don't want to live in a world without Exile on Main Street.
Tenemos por aquí alguna pregunta más, creo. Mira.
I think there's another question over here. Hi, Joe. I'm Veronica, and I'm a huge fan of yours. I have been for a really long time, and I wanted to ask you about the heart-shaped box book. When is the film going to be done? Finally, any news?
Heart-shaped box was sold to the movies, and Neil Jordan, who wrote The Crying Game and some other great pictures, was going to write and direct. There was a writer's strike, and Neil Jordan went back. He couldn't work on the heart-shaped box screenplay anymore. He went back to Ireland to make a different picture, and books are like loaves of bread to Hollywood. So when it's new and fresh and smells good, they want to make a sandwich out of it. But if it sits on the shelf for a few days, they'd rather buy some different bread. So I don't have any sense that the heart-shaped box film is moving forward at all. Sometimes I hear little stirrings, like something might be happening. But, you know, Heart-Shaped Box was published in 2007, and in Hollywood, that's 75 years ago.
¿No te da miedo eso?
Aren't you afraid of that? Whenever somebody shows any interest in your work, that you lose control of it and find it on a screen. Well, Neil Jordan would have done a great job, obviously, but it could be anyone.
So, first of all, if someone makes a bad movie out of your book, you can just take the wad of cash out of your pocket and wipe away your tears with it, you know. That's the first thing. You know, the second thing is I wrote my stories, you know, and if someone makes a movie out of The Fireman, say someone wanted to make a musical out of The Fireman, I think that could be awesome. I'd love to buy a ticket for that film. Would it be the book? No. It obviously would not be the book. It would be something different and unique, and if it was well made, it would be the director's version of that story, and it would be its own living thing. So you want to give, if someone is kind enough to adapt your work, you want to give them the freedom to tell their own version of the story and not feel handcuffed to what you did. And why should they? You know, the movie Horns came out. I love the movie Horns. In some ways, I love the movie better than the book. But there was nothing Daniel Radcliffe or Alexandra Aja could do that would change a single word of the book, you know, for good or bad. I'm stuck with what I wrote.
Hay más preguntas por aquí seguramente.
Of course, more questions over here. Hi, I wanted to ask Joe about your creative process with Gabriel in Lock and Key, whether you have other projects on the way with him, and how the TV series for Lock and Key is going.
So right now, Hulu is making a TV show out of Lock and Key based on a script that I wrote. The Argentinian director Andre Machete is directing the pilot. He's best known for a horror film called Mama. It's terrifically scary and a lot of fun. He also recently directed the adaptation of my dad's novel, It. And I had the good fortune to see an early screening of it about 4 weeks ago. And I think it's that Andre's adaptation of It is one of the 5 scariest films ever made. It's tremendously humane. You love the characters in it, but it is just relentlessly terrifying. I mean, only Jaws, The Exorcist, John Carpenter's The Thing, and Let the Right One In are scarier. It's that good. It's that brilliant. But in any event, Hulu is developing Lock and Key. I'm very engaged in it. I'm going to write the first 2 scripts. The third script I'm writing with C. Robert Cargill, who was the screenwriter on Doctor Strange and Sinister, and has a great science fiction novel coming out called Sea of Rust. So Cargill's terrifically talented, and I'm going to be involved throughout the first season, assuming it gets on the air, which we do not know for certain, and we won't know until January. We have to film the pilot and see what happens.
Y a raíz de esto...
And with that, Lock and Key is a whole universe. So are you tempted to continue exploring that universe and making it a little bigger, or is it going to remain as is with the story you've told so far?
As long as Gabe wants to draw Lock and Key, I'll keep writing Lock and Key because I love to see what he does.
Qué bien.
And
that's great.
Gabriel Rodriguez, he doesn't just do pretty pictures. I learned as much about the characters in Lock and Key from the way Gabe drew them as he ever learned from me about those characters from what I wrote. Many of the most central ideas in Lock and Key didn't come from me. They came from Gabe. There is a twist very close to the end, and Gabe was the one who suggested it. And just like dropping the bear, it was one of these things where he was laughing when he said it. He clearly wasn't serious, but as soon as he said it, I said, that's it. We have to do that. I don't want to say what, because it involves something that happens in the last 2 books of the series, and no spoilers. So we have continued to do Lock and Key stories. Most of the Lock and Key stories we've done are set in the past now. I don't know if I'll ever do it, but I have a fantasy about another 7-book Lock and Key series called World War Key. And the way that would be written is we would have one story set in the Revolutionary War, and that would be 1 book. And then the next book would be set in the modern day and would feature repercussions of the events that happened in the Revolutionary War.
Whoa.
Then we would do another story set in the Civil War, and then jump to the modern day to show modern day repercussions of the keys that were created during the Civil War and the events that happened in the Civil War. And finally we would end with World War II and what happened during World War II in Key House, and then return to the future to talk about that. And so I said 7 books, I meant 6. So it would be another 6-book series to match the original series. But it's one thing to think about it, it's another thing to do all the work of writing it. I don't know if I'm going to really... So much work. I don't know. God, I don't know. Maybe it's better to just imagine it exists.
Pues me has puesto el...
Well, that's made me quite excited. Well, that and the fact that It version is one of the top 5 horror films in history, because I don't like It at all. Well, Juan, we're not going to talk about It. Let's listen to other questions from the audience.
Spain. Yo quisiera...
I'd like to know your father, Stephen King, got into comic books by writing some short stories for American Vampires with Scott Snyder. And I wonder if, like you, he asked you for help to get into the world of comic books, and if it would be possible in this new series of Lock and Key, whether you might not co-write a story with your dad for Lock and Key.
With Lock and Key, no, I would not co-write with my dad, and the reason is I already have a co-storyteller, and his name is Gabriel Rodriguez. So too many cooks would spoil the stew. I think I'm going to stick with Gabe on Lock and Key. As far as my dad's forays into comic books, he worked on American Vampire, and he sent me his script to ask if he had done it right. And I wrote him back and I said, Dad, you got to take out the thought balloons, because he had people thinking with puffy thought balloons. He's like, they don't do that anymore. It's like when you watch an old TV show and the husband and wife go into their bedroom and they each wear pajamas and they each have separate beds. You know, that's not really how people sleep together. And no one really does the thought balloon thing. So that's what I told him, and I shamed him out of doing thought balloons in his American Vampire. But in the years since, I've thought I should have left him alone. If he wants to have thought balloons, he should get to have thought balloons. You know, who am I to say thought balloons don't belong in modern comics? Maybe sometimes a husband and wife do sleep in their pajamas in separate beds.
Es maravilloso, ¿eh?
That's wonderful to imagine Stephen King saying to Joe, check this thing on my cell phone, I can't figure it out. These small vignettes of family life of two geniuses in pajamas in separate beds, like something on Sesame Street. But I'm sure you taught your dad to use WhatsApp.
¿WhatsApp qué es eso? ¿WhatsApp qué es eso?
Controller?
No, it's...
Sí que está fuera de las redes, ¿eh?
Obviously not on social media.
Message application.
Oh, okay. Cool. I don't even know how to use the Snapchat. I'm getting to be one of these old people who says, I don't understand the Twitter. I've tried the Twitter, I don't get it. I prefer to stick with the Facebook.
Bueno, pues no le enseñó el...
Okay, so maybe you didn't teach him, but you did teach him to take out those thought balloons, which was no minor thing.
Idea is MySpace. I spend all my time on MySpace. People are very nice to me there.
Ahora lo está petando el MySpace.
Yeah, it's totally popular, better than ever now, MySpace, and 20.
I'm going back. That's going to be my social network. I'm going back to MySpace.
No.
Entonces tu eslogan va a ser...
So your motto will be, make MySpace great again?
Make MySpace great again. I like it.
Bueno, no te ibas a ir de aquí sin conocer el humor de...
Of course, that's Juan's attempt at humor. Another question over there. Hi, Joe. Good evening. Hi. Hi. Okay, just wanted to say that Lock and Key is one of the top 3 comic books or graphic novel or however you want to call it, Arturo. I think it's one of the top comic book series I've read in my life, probably amongst the top 3. I do think you're an amazing imaginative writer, incredibly good at your craft. But my question is very simple. Have you ever had that blank page panic moment?
Ha sido por urbanizaciones para hacer la pregunta, ¿no? O sea,
That took a long time for a pretty simple question.
Well, no, so the question is, I think really the question is if I ever suffered from writer's block. You know, writer's block is when you sit down and you can't figure out what to write. I think writer's block is a lie, that it's a fake condition that doesn't really exist. What writer's block is when you sit down in front of the computer and you want to write about something. There's some subject you care about that you want to write about, but you won't give yourself permission to write about. Maybe it's masturbation. You want to write a story about masturbation. And you got this story, it's in your heart, it's bursting to come out. But you're thinking, what if my mother reads it? I can't write that. If I write about that, my mother will think I'm horrible. You know, and so you're like, well, I'm going to write something else. And your subconscious says, no, you're not. Actually, you're not going to write something else. You're going to write the masturbation story or nothing. And so then you sit there in front of the computer and you're like, I can't think of anything. No, you can't. You could think of something. You just don't want to write what you thought about. The solution to this is to just write the masturbation story. And by the way, your mama already knows about it. You're not fooling anyone.
Son trucos.
Okay, good piece of advice there. Any other questions? Back there. And down here, too. Okay.
Hear your take on women in comic books.
Women in comic books. So when I grew up, there was something was happening in comics that was very thrilling. It was the British invasion. There were all these writers coming over from the United Kingdom. Neil Gaiman, Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, Jamie Delano was another one who wrote Preacher. And they brought a seriousness and a commitment and a level of literary erudition that no one had seen before. And it was like they insisted, your art form, your American art form, is better than you realized. Let us show you what we can do with it. The same thing had happened in rock and roll back in the 60s and 70s. There was this moment when all these British musicians said, you've just made the most wonderful thing. Don't you realize how wonderful this is? Let us help you see how wonderful your music can be. I think we're having another moment in comic books right now, and instead of the British invasion, we're having the female invasion. We have all these amazing writers like G. Willow Wilson, Gail Simone, and Kate Leth, who are creating terrific, personal, vibrant, energetic stories. And it's making comics great again. Oh God, that's no. It's making comics. It's bringing a level of inclusion and excitement to comics. You know, something fresh to comics. And actually, we see this throughout my culture, which is geek culture. You know, we see it in movies where the lead of the last 2 Star Wars films was female. The leads in the next Star Trek picture, the next Star Trek show, are female. The new Doctor is female, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's so exciting. You know, every time I think about it, I get pumped up. The first
un antisistema de mucho cuidado.
See, he's such a rebel. Listen to him.
The best superhero film of the last 5 or 6 years is Wonder Woman. It's terrific because simply exploring the issues of another gender, the possibilities, problems, opportunities, considerations of another gender is fresh and different and changes the stakes and makes it interesting and opens up those worlds to more people. So I think it's great that there's so much terrific writing and art coming out of women in comics, and I look forward to seeing more of it. And I don't know what else there is to say about it. I mean, you know, anyone who's got a problem with it has personal issues that they need to work on.
Pues tenemos más.
Right, more questions. Also from a woman.
About a very frightening dog, Cujo.
Yeah.
Do you plan to write about another frightening dog, Molly, the thing of evil?
Oh, is there any chance my dad... so there's a couple of things I want to say about this, first of all. So the question is about my dad's Welsh Corgi, Molly, the thing of evil. So I have a Welsh Corgi named McMurtry. And quite by chance, McMurtry wound up on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. And for a while, I would argue McMurtry was one of the 6 or 7 most famous Welsh Corgis in the world. And then along comes this newcomer, Molly, the thing of evil. And it's just like A Star is Born. You know, there's like the old, dignified, beautiful star, McMurtry, and then there's this callow up-and-comer who's like, look at me, na 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 na, and that's Molly. So I don't need to write a story to criticize Molly, because Molly's own actions paint a vile and disturbing picture of a dog that's out of control and on her way down. So that's the first thing. The second thing, which I think is really interesting, is, of course, you called the book Cujo, which is what everyone calls the book. It is the greatest mispronunciation in the history of literature, and it's right there in the book. In the book, a character says, the name of the dog is Cujo. It's a J with the Spanish pronunciation. And it's mystifying to me that the whole world has decided the name of the dog is Cujo, when it's clear in the book that everyone is calling the dog Cujo. Cujo.
No, no lo tienes, Joe.
No, you're not doing it right. No, Joe, sorry, you're not doing it right. You have everything else, but you can't do the Spanish J. I'm sorry. We do it right here. We do say it as Cujo here.
Cujo in Spain?
Cujo.
Cujo?
Cujo.
It's like the H in Harrison Ford.
Yeah. It's
Cujo.
Harrison. Is it Harrison Ford?
Like you're just something in your throat.
Yeah. Harrison Ford?
Vamos a avanzar.
Well, we're making progress, but he's going to lose his voice, poor guy. We don't want to do that.
Dude, that's really cool. He can roll his R's. Like, I bet everyone in this room can roll their R's. Can do that.
We were born like that.
Can you do it? Oh my God, that's so awesome. I wish I could do that.
Ya está. Como en España no hay R's.
Well, you know, in Spain, we do our R's right. We do. Question over there. Hi, Joe. I wanted to ask you, you spoke about Creepshow earlier and your experience as an actor, as a child actor. And so we wondered how that happened, how you got that role, and how it was to get slapped.
Connection. It was a connections thing.
Y luego, ¿cómo fue sobre todo la...
But tell us about the experience with George Romero, who just died on Sunday, unfortunately.
Well, he gave great hugs. You know, George Romero was this big bearded guy.
Romero.
Yeah.
Romero.
Si llegamos a descubrir esto al
I'm not going to attempt it. I'm not going to attempt it. George Romero, I actually had a chance to write a story about George Romero. I wrote a short story called Bobby Conroy Comes Back from the Dead. When Dawn of the Dead was made in Pittsburgh, actually in Monroeville, Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh, George Romero hired people to be walk-on zombies, and you could get paid $1 a day to be one of the undead in a George Romero film. And so I wrote a short story, Bobby Conroy Comes Back from the Dead, which is a romance, it's a love story, about two former high school comedians who sign up to be zombies for the day. And both of them have gone on, she's married to someone else, and he went on to, he thought he was going to be on Saturday Night Live in the 70s, but he wasn't funny enough, and he didn't make it. So they both wind up in Monroeville being zombies for a day and rekindling their romance. But the real reason I wrote that story was because I couldn't write about Creepshow. I wanted to write, I couldn't do it without people figuring out who I was. So I wrote about Dawn of the Dead instead as a way to write about how much I admired and was impressed by George Romero and Tom Savini. The whole gang that made the picture, they talk about guerrilla filmmaking. They really were like guerrillas. They all dressed in army clothes, you know, and in fatigues. And they did everything for free. They would break into places to film stuff. And it was all about doing it cheap and doing it recklessly. And that ethos is really what powered all those early Romero films, and one of the things that made him so great. The zany, what will they do next feeling. You know, I love that. He was a wonderful man. I was very lucky to have a chance to spend some time with him in 2006, which was the last time I saw him, and you know, and tell him again how much I admired him.
Ese relato del que está hablando.
The story he's talking about is in that Ghosts collection, because you don't only have to read Lock and Key or The Fireman. He's got all those short story collections, which are also amazing and really fun. One last question, because he's got a flight to catch. Yeah.
Before we get to your last question, is my fly unzipped? I've been wondering this ever since I sat down. We've been here. Is my fly unzipped? I'm scared to check. I've been kind of keeping the shirt down like this. You never think to check until you're in front of a couple hundred people. And then as soon as you're out there, you're like, God, and you kind of can't really look because it looks weird. Like if you're checking out your own crotch during the whole...
Pero te voy a dar un truco. I'm going to give you...
I'll tell you a trick. So you pretend to be scratching the front... But what you're actually doing is making sure that the top zip of your zip is there. And so, but you don't actually scratch down here, but up here. I think the time has come to wrap this up. This would be a good moment. No. There was one more question up there. Hi, Joe. I wonder if everything you've written so far, if you had to pick one character, who would it be?
If I had to pick one character for what? For execution? To hug?
Of your books, your favorite character for
Who's
your books.
my favorite character of the books?
Or comics?
Probably my favorite character from the books is Harper from The Fireman. That's not a very interesting answer because it's like the book that just came out. But she was so much fun to write. You know, she's funny and she's smart. She's really, really tough. But she's like, she never swears. You know, she doesn't do like obscene language and stuff, you know, because Julie Andrews wouldn't. You couldn't imagine Julie Andrews saying something really obscene. Except she does, when she gets drunk, she swears a little bit. That kind of comes bubbling out a little bit. But she was really, really fun to write. And I enjoyed every page I spent with her.
Bueno, pues vamos a...
Great, so let's leave it there. Let's say goodbye to Joe. I think it's been absolutely a wonderful surprise to get to know him. Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you for everything. He has to leave. He's in a hurry. He has to leave. He's got a plane to catch. He can't sign anything, but we'll be singing My Fair Lady, the full thing. Thank you for coming.
Pacheco y nada, pues eso, nos vemos en el Celsius también. Gracias, gracias. Go Hill. Juan, te vas a matar, Juan.